She's sitting courtside at a Lakers game, third row, the kind of seat that costs more than most people's monthly rent. She's wearing something simple. No logo you can read from a distance. No jewelry that screams. Just a woman watching basketball with the particular stillness of someone who has absolutely nowhere else to be. The camera finds her for 3 seconds. The internet loses its mind for 3 days. That's Rihanna. And by the time that photo circulates, she has already made more money today than she will make from every song she has ever recorded, combined, across her entire career. Today alone. You don't know that yet. That's the whole point. Here's what most people get wrong about Rihanna. They think the story is about talent. And it is, partially. The voice is real. The catalog is real. Umbrella. We Found Love. Diamonds. These are not accidents. These are songs that rewired a generation's nervous system. She sold over 250 million records. She is one of the best-selling music artists in human history. And that's not how she became a billionaire. The music made her famous. Famous is not the same as wealthy. Famous is a raw material. Wealthy is what you build from it. Most people who get famous never figure out the difference. They spend the material instead of investing it. They become the product instead of owning one. Rihanna figured it out. Not immediately, not without mistakes. But she figured it out in a way that almost nobody in her position ever has. This is how. It starts in 2017. Not with a launch party. Not with a press release. With a range of foundation shades. 40 of them. The beauty industry at that time operated on a quiet, unspoken assumption that darker skin tones were a niche. That the mainstream market was one thing and everyone else was an afterthought, a secondary line, a limited edition. Brands would release 12 shades, call it inclusive, and move on. Fenty Beauty launched with 40 shades and called the other brands bluff. The darker end of the range sold out in hours. Not days, hours. Because the customers were always there. The demand was always real. The industry had simply decided, for decades, that it wasn't worth serving. Rihanna didn't discover an untapped market. She looked at the people who had been ignored and said, "These are my customers first." That is a different thing than finding a gap. That is a moral position that happened to also be an extraordinary business decision. And the market responded the way markets respond when someone finally gives them what they actually want. Fenty Beauty made $100 million in its first 40 days. Read that again. 40 days. But here's a part of that story that matters more than the number. Rihanna did not own Fenty Beauty the way a celebrity owns a fragrance deal. This was not a licensing arrangement where she puts her name on someone else's product and collects a royalty check. Those deals exist everywhere. They are comfortable. They are also someone else's business. She partnered with LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, the largest luxury goods conglomerate on the planet. The company that owns Louis Vuitton, Dior, Givenchy, Bulgari, Dom Perignon. A company with a market capitalization larger than the GDP of most countries. And she did it as a co-owner, an equity partner, a founder. Bernard Arnault, the man who runs LVMH, who is himself one of the wealthiest people alive, looked at Rihanna and said, "We want to build this with you, not for you." That is not a sentence LVMH says to many people. That is not a door that opens for most people who knock on it. She walked through it because she brought something LVMH could not manufacture internally. She brought a community, a global audience that trusted her not as a spokesperson but as a person. That trust was the asset. The product was just a vehicle. This is the thing about real leverage. It doesn't look like power from the outside. It looks like a woman who makes good lipstick. 2 years later, Savage X Fenty, laundry, another industry with the same quiet assumption buried inside it. That beauty had a default setting, that the market was a specific size and shape and everything else was plus size, which in retail language has historically meant afterthought. Savage X Fenty launched size inclusive from day one, not as a marketing angle, as the actual product architecture. The runway shows, if you can call them that, were performances that looked like nothing the laundry industry had ever produced. Diverse bodies, live music, spectacle designed not to sell a fantasy of who you could be but to reflect who the customer already was. The customer noticed. The customer always notices when you see them. Savage X Fenty was valued at $1 billion in 2021, a laundry company that didn't exist 4 years earlier. She now had $2 billion businesses, and she still hadn't released an album. You have to sit with that for a moment. There are artists who spend their entire careers chasing the kind of commercial success that would make them financially stable. They release album after album. They tour until their bodies break. They license their music for commercials and TV shows and ringtones and playlists, and still, at 45, they are managed by the same machinery that found them at 19, and they own very little of what they built. Rihanna watched that machinery for years. She understood it from the inside, and then she stepped outside it. She did not stop being an artist. She stopped being only an artist. Most people at that point say yes to everything. They monetize every surface. They license and endorse and appear and promote until the name means nothing anymore because it's been attached to everything. She said yes to 2 things, and she owned them. That is not a small decision. That is a decision. The single choice that separates people who are famous and wealthy from people who are famous, and then, quietly, not. Now let's talk about what she actually built. Fenty Beauty is not just a beauty company. It is a data company. Every product launch, every shade extension, every limited edition drop tells Rihanna's team something precise about the customer. What they buy first, what they return, what they photograph and post and show their friends, what they wait in line for at 3 a.m. on a launch night. That data is an asset that compounds. It makes the next product more accurate. It makes the marketing more targeted. It makes the brand harder to replicate because the relationship between the brand and its customer is not built on advertising. It's built on years of being seen and understood. Savage X Fenty added a subscription model. Customers pay monthly. Monthly revenue is predictable revenue. Predictable revenue is what investors value above almost everything else because it removes uncertainty from the math. The company knew, on the first of every month, approximately what it would earn. That is a fundamentally different business than one that spikes on launch days and then waits. The subscription model also creates lock-in, not in a predatory way, in the way that any good product creates habit. You think about it when you're getting dressed. It becomes part of your routine. The brand becomes part of your life, and leaving it requires a decision you keep not making. This is how consumer businesses build moats. Not through exclusivity, but through presence. Through showing up in someone's daily life until they stop thinking of you as a brand and start thinking of you as a habit. By 2023, Rihanna performed at the Super Bowl halftime show. No featured artists. No costume changes for distraction. Just the stage, the catalog, and a baby bump she revealed to the world in real time in front of 100 million people. The internet calculated afterward that the performance generated over $100 million in Fenty Beauty sales in the 24 hours that followed. She did not get paid to perform at the Super Bowl. The NFL does not pay halftime performers. She performed for free and used the largest television audience in America as a product launch. That is not an accident. That is strategy operating at a level so clean it looks like instinct. She looked at a stage that would have cost her $100 million to buy in advertising, and she was given it for free because she was the only person in the world who could fill it the way the NFL needed it filled. She understood her own value precisely enough to use it instead of spending it. Here is a number that most people skip past because it doesn't feel real. Rihanna's net worth crossed $1.4 billion. Less than 5% of that comes from music. The rest is equity. Ownership stakes in businesses she helped build, businesses she understood deeply enough to position correctly, businesses that served customers the industry had written off. She did not inherit this. She did not marry into it. She did not get lucky with a crypto investment or a tech stock that happened to run. She built companies, boring, physical, product companies that make things people put on their bodies every morning. The wealth is not complicated. It is the oldest kind. Find what people need. Build it better than anyone else is willing to build it for them. Own as much of it as possible. What is complicated is having the clarity to do that when you are already famous enough to coast. When you could release an album tomorrow and sell out every stadium on earth. When the easy version of your life is already extraordinary. She chose a harder thing. Not because the harder thing is more virtuous. Because the harder thing builds equity, and equity builds a kind of wealth that doesn't depend on whether you feel like performing. She's back courtside. Same seat. The game is close. She watches it the way people watch things they don't need to be anywhere near but choose to be anyway. Somewhere right now, a woman is standing in a drugstore holding a foundation in a shade she has never been able to find before. She doesn't think about Rihanna when she buys it. She thinks about her own face in the mirror tomorrow morning. That woman is the point. Not the Super Bowl, not the billions, not the LVMH partnership or the Forbes cover or the courtside seats. The woman in the drugstore who finally found her shade. That is the product. That is the customer. That is the whole thing. The money is just what happens when you get it right. And Rihanna got it right. Not because she's a genius. Not because she's lucky. Because she looked at an industry that had decided certain people didn't matter, and she said, those are my people and I'm going to build something for them. The industry thought that was charity. It was a business plan.